Changemakers. Thank you for tuning into the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. I'm your fervent feminist host, Raven O'Neill, and I get the honors of sitting down weekly with diverse experts from all walks of life to explore ideas, opportunities, and strategies that we can all use to hack our way to better lives within patriarchal societies. If you're ready to hack patriarchal systems and structures, I invite you to join us and help move the needle. Today, I get the privilege of introducing you to Heather O'Neill. Heather is an anti-capitalist product leader with over 20 years of experience building products, connecting with users, and scaling businesses that do good. Heather focuses on helping founders solve their toughest challenges and grow mature, community-focused businesses that center on people over profits. Please offer Heather your warmest welcome. Hello, Heather. Welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you today. We are going to be talking about being the boss, running your own business, having your husband work for you, and also a bunch of stuff about capitalism and business. I would love to start off by having you tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I have been a business owner for 16 years and longer if you count my forays into babysitting and other things. But I've been doing this a long time and working in the tech space sort of longer than a lot of the things we know as technology have been around. So I've seen a lot of things come and go. And I've also seen the way that our obsession with growth at all costs has really negatively impacted the rest of the world. So that's how I'm coming in.
Awesome. I love to talk about tech. I was having tech fail me today, and I was just talking to the kids. My children, specifically my son yesterday, was asking if computers were really that big and bulky when they started out. He just couldn't wrap his head around it. It's like, oh yeah. All right, diving into the topic, I know we had talked about discussing kind of being the leader in your company, but also having your husband working with you and for you, which is an interesting, maybe not so common dynamic, and especially as it relates to the topic of hacking the patriarchy, what that might look like and what those dynamics look like, and how women who are either going to launch a business and have their husbands or partners working with them or working for them, how they might navigate that.
Yeah, it's not something we intentionally set out to do, but I actually have worked with my husband longer than we've been married. So my first business was started with someone that my husband and I were both friends with. He had someone who wanted to do a design project. He was like, my husband's name is Jim. Jim, you should be involved. And I was like, oh, I should be involved too. And then we became business partners, and Jim was a designer on our team. And that's how that happened. Jim and I were dating at the time. I broke up with him a few times before we ended up getting married and staying together. But through the entire time, he worked at my business that I had with a different person who was my co-founder. When we dissolved the business, I started another business right away because I had a client who really wanted to work with us from the old business. So I was like, oh, sure, I'll just start another company and keep doing this. And then my husband just continued to work for me because it made sense. And we'd been doing it for 6 years already. So
Is there a lot of friction there, or how do you manage that? And then the dynamic of when you're not at work, your partners. I imagine that those two relationships are very different.
They are and they aren't. I think it comes down to skill set. So Jim has no desire to run a business or do anything that involves, getting sales, maintaining relationships, talking to clients. Like he just wants to design cool stuff. So he's really satisfied with, I go out and talk to the people, find clients for us, build relationships, and do all the things that keep the business running, and then also manage the bills and the payments and everything like that, because that's nothing he's interested in. And he gets to do design work. And what we found is we work really well together. I'm able to, improve his designs. He's able to get a lot of things done in a quick fashion, and it works well. So I think the thing is understanding what each of us actually wants out of the relationship, both from a business perspective and then in life as well. Like, who's going to do what? How is this going to work for our family? We also have a kid who is 10. And so what does it look like to be parenting, who's on when, since we both work remotely and she is also schooled remotely, we're all home all day.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of
Have
communication. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. I was going to ask a bunch of questions, but if you have
Please do.
more.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It brought up a bunch of questions for me. Going back, you had known each other before you launched the business, though. I kind of wonder, for those tuning in who are considering launching a business with their partner, if it's ideal to have that conversation about who's doing what and whose interests and goals are way in advance.
I mean, I always think so. One of the things I think that makes us work so well is my propensity to over communicate, like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Hey, I'm going to do this. Hey, I need this from you and I need you to not mess it up. These are real conversations that we have. It's not that everything just works magically. We do a lot of talking, like all the time. It's funny because my 10-year-old will get annoyed, like if we talk too much business at the dinner table. She'll be like, this is boring. I want to talk about other stuff. So we have to curb our business conversations to business times, basically. So being really intentional about that. So, yeah, I think if you're thinking about starting something with your partner, talk about it first. Talk about the bad. Like, hey, if this goes south, how are we going to feel? Hey, if we ever separate, are you going to be upset that you don't own part of the business or whatever? Or are you going to be mad that you gave away part of the business and felt like it? Who's going to be responsible as the face of the company? Because there's always one person who is that, right? So talking through the bad, it's just like any other aspect of your relationship. The choices you make about how things split don't have to look like mine and my spouse's. They can look like whatever works for you, as long as everybody's actually satisfied with that. One of the things I see so often, and I was just in a Slack group today where someone was like, oh my God, my husband's been playing video games all day, and I asked for 2 hours to get some work done, and he got mad at me. And I was like, why are we living like this? We do so much capitulating, especially as women, right? Where I'm like, you don't have to. You can just say, no, I won't be doing that. And you can do it, or we can go our separate ways. It doesn't have to be that all or nothing, but understanding what you actually want versus where you're sort of accommodating somebody else, and eventually you'll develop resentment. And they just won't know. And sometimes they know and don't care, and that's a different issue of like maybe you should dump him. But I am possibly too quick to say dump him. uh,
I you brought up a point that I think is important too, is that you guys have very different roles, and he's very happy doing that creative part. And I wonder, if you're thinking about going into business with a partner, that you really want to make sure that you know what lights you up and you kind of stick to that. Because if you have two personalities who really love being the creative or really love being the boss, I'm sure that there could be friction there too.
Yeah, and it actually reminds me of my first business with my former business partner. He and I were very good friends. Obviously, was dating my husband at the time, but the business partner I was working with, we both were interested in different aspects of running a business, and he was mostly doing sales and I was doing operations and finance and team management. Unsurprisingly, I took on a lot of grunt work. The reason that broke down is because he kept taking credit for things that I did. He talked about it as his business and not as our business, if that makes sense. And so there was a big disconnect. And so the more that I advocated for myself, and when you're in your early 20s, you don't know what you should not be sort of capitulating on or compromising. And so as I realized, oh, I'm doing a lot of this stuff and I want credit for this stuff. Because even in the sales process, when we got to the build a proposal for our potential client phase, I would step in and build the whole proposal and run the closing of the process. So he was doing a very small amount of most of running the business and taking most of the credit and accolades and prestige of having a successful business that was sort of run on my efforts. And so as I stepped into like, hey, actually, I did that, not you. And maybe we should say I get some credit here too. He got more antagonistic and there was a lot more discord in our relationship when I became less accommodating. And I think that was to my detriment of not having talked in advance about what the roles would look like, how we were going to share things. I do think it can work, but I think part of the reason it stopped working is because he didn't like having to share credit or the spotlight, and he liked the feeling of I made this and not we made this.
Yeah, I feel like that's a critical step and a thing that I see a ton in actually in a lot of co-founders, but especially married co-founders. There's always usually a breakdown at some point because of not just not figuring out who does what and why. Again, going back to just really setting those boundaries in the first place. And I love that you pointed out that he didn't like when you actually decided this is how it's going to work, because usually men don't like that.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what I've seen is that I think if you're going into business with your spouse, you have to be sure about how you solve problems. A thing I see a lot, so I do a lot of coaching and especially coaching of business owners, a lot of whom are women. And a lot of time their partners will be fine until something goes wrong. And that's what I think is always the telling moment is when things are bad. Do they suddenly start treating you like shit? Do they call you names? Do they berate you? Do they belittle you? That's a problem. That is not like they were just mad problem, because anybody can be mad, but how they treat you when you're mad, but when they are mad, is indicative of what they really feel in some respects, or the level of disrespect that they're willing to entertain towards you and the value to which they value your relationship.
Yeah, that's actually an important point. And as you were talking, I thought about that saying too, like you teach people how to treat you. And depending on how you've set that up in the beginning is also going to cause friction if it changes. But you are absolutely right that in moments of heat and a fire and of emotion and high emotional stakes.
And high stress. Like business is a
Yes.
high stress endeavor, especially like for us, Pixels is our main source of income. And so the business has to make money. I can't just, it's not speculative. It's not a cute side hustle where it's like, oh, I hope this works out. It literally is the thing that pays our bills. And everybody, we have a lot of bills. And so if things aren't working, we need to have conversations about that. We need to talk about what are the impacts and the options. And most of that falls on me. And that's part of my job as the business owner and why Jim is not the business owner, because mostly he's involved in the sense of I keep him up to date on things that are going on. And if we have a decision to make about something, I might talk it over with him. But he doesn't want to think as much about that stuff. So I do it. Right. And I come to him and I say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about this thing. And he's usually like, yeah, okay. He trusts me to have all of our family's best interests at heart when making decisions. Does that make sense? But
Yeah.
I think Jim in some ways is an anomaly because he is willing to not be the one in charge. And too many men are like, well, I have to be in charge because reasons.
The patriarchy.
Right? Yeah, literally the patriarchy says men are in charge. And so men think they should be in charge, even though they know nothing about being in charge a lot of the times. You know, like in terms of getting things done. If you look at historically who's able to get things done, a lot of times it's women because women have to get things done. They just don't get the credit.
That is a perfect segue into where I wanted to take the conversation, because I know when we were getting ready to record, we had a conversation previously and we wanted to dive into business and capitalism and how that affects being a woman in business and what you bring to the table and leading with, the more feminine attributes of empathy and kindness and partnerships versus the money train. And so I just want to circle back to that and look at what you've seen and being a woman in business, how you take that on and how you might recommend our listeners tackle the topic.
Yeah, I mean it's a non-trivial topic for covering in full in a podcast, but I will do my best. I think that when it comes to business, the biggest challenge that we see is this idea of like growth at all costs. And I even have had business coaches who were women who were otherwise marginalized, who would still say things like, oh, if you're not growing, you're dying. Like your business always has to be growing. And these beliefs are pervasive, just like the belief that capitalism equals making money, and if you're anti-capitalist, then you don't make money, which is frankly not true. Like I said, our business has to make money because I still live here in the world with the rest of you all. Like I can't just float. We don't have a trust fund. And so when we're talking about growth and business and capitalism, it becomes this race to constantly go up, which is why we see so many layoffs happening. The reason they're happening is not because, oh, we have too many people. That might be a small part of it. It's also because, oh, it makes our bottom line look really good right now. Oh, our expenses are down because what's the most expensive thing? Paying people. So why are we trying to use AI to replace people? Because it's cheaper. That's why we're seeing so much push for AI to go after so many creative endeavors, because the most expensive thing is to pay people to be creative. And if you're looking at a capitalist model where you want profit and more profit always, and that's the only way you're winning, then you end up in this race to how do we pay people the least? How do we exploit them the most? That's why we need a minimum wage, because if companies could pay you less, they would, right? That's the thing that I think, just as a frame for this whole conversation, that as a baseline understanding of what it means to be a part of capitalism. Capitalism at its very nature is exploitation. So when we talk about running a business, I imagine that most of your listeners are running anti-capitalist business, whether they call it that or not. And the name matters less than the intention. If you would not underpay people, if you would not exploit someone for free work, if you would not try to grow at any cost and you are okay with the fluctuation up and down of your business revenue, those are very anti-capitalist principles, because they say, actually, humans and the world matter a little bit more than just making money. And I also want to make money because I want to survive. But there is space for more than that in my business. And my business is not just millions and millions of dollars. Also, because I think a lot of people, the reason we want to make millions and millions of dollars is to be able to opt out of capitalism, right? Because capitalism says everything has to have a cost, and whatever the people want, then the market sells. And if it can't make money, it doesn't matter. And so we need money to survive. And the only thing we can sell is our labor. If we have enough money, we don't have to sell our labor anymore. So the reason you want to win at capitalism is so you don't have to capitalism anymore. And that's, to me, like the most mind-blowing thing, because really all of us do want to just like lie around in the sun all day, right? And not that we would never do anything creative, but we could build a society where if everyone's needs were met, we could have a much better space for creativity, for exploration, for doing projects where it's like, oh, I'd love to do that, but there's no money in it. Why does there need to be money in it? We all have things we would love to do if there was money in it, or if we had the time, but we were too busy selling our labor to survive.
It's both a catch-22 and a cruel irony.
Right.
My goodness. And that actually, it made, well, I had two thoughts. I had, at what point have you reached to the point that capitalism is not the issue? Obviously, some people, it doesn't matter whether they've reached the pinnacle and they can sit on the beach. They're still in that mindset. But yeah, I had that thought. I'm like, at what point, maybe it's some kind of character flaw to like reach a point and still be like, you know what, I'm still going to be a dick.
I think it's a learned behavior, because to win at capitalism, you have to be ruthless, right? I
Yeah.
could make so much more money. And I actually talk about this a lot, about how I leave money on the table all the time, because who the fuck cares? I'm not here to grow to the biggest that I could ever grow financially for its own sake. I have other goals and intentions in mind. And if it's going to cost me my time with my child, my ability to have no, like, I don't work Fridays ever because I have a 4-day work week company, my ability to take time off when I want it, my ability to go out and live my life, it's not worth it. But I think people, it's easy to lose sight of that. Not to mention societally, the messages and the stories, put in hard effort to get to get your returns, put in the work, be productive, be a member of society who contributes. All these narratives reinforce this idea that we should be working at a job, doing something valuable for society. But when society is based on making money, it's not actually valuable for society, because it would probably be more valuable if you went out and made beautiful art, because that might evoke emotion and thoughtfulness in people. but that's not money making. So we say go sit at a computer or, go work at a grocery store or whatever. And so the reason that when people get to the point where they could opt out of capitalism, they don't, is because by the time they've gotten there, they mostly lose sight of that. And they don't know how to have enough because nothing ever feels like enough. I imagine Jeff Bezos is sitting there going, but I don't have enough, in his heart of hearts, because he doesn't know how. Having enough, there are some levels where poverty creates significant problems, and there's a level of enough that matters. And I'm not saying money doesn't matter, it absolutely does. I want to be clear about that. In this society, money matters, but there's a point at which it matters less than other things. And being able to recognize when you hit that point without moving a goalpost is a practice of what you believe and revisiting the unspoken beliefs that you don't even know you're holding about money, about productivity, about who you are in society, and about what counts, right? The number of people I talk to who are like, oh, I want to take a break, but I feel guilty. Have you ever said that?
God, all the time.
Yeah. Why do you feel guilty taking a break? What's under that? If you sit and ask yourself, you're going to go, oh, shit. Like, why do I feel guilty for not working all the time? And it's because we're in this system that says if you're not working, you're not valuable. So even when we hit the threshold mark, we don't know how to stop.
Not only that, there's probably not the correct threshold. Like the threshold is relative, right, to the
Oh
person.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing is, like, no matter what threshold you hit, if you don't know how to feel like you have enough, you will never feel like you have enough. Which is why rich white people who have millions are like, oh, my life is so hard. My income barely covers my nanny. Like, those articles have been written, and those people are sincere in believing that they don't have enough, and they have millions, and they pay for nannies, and they have a brownstone in New York, but they still feel that way because we're all trained to feel that way, so we stay in the system. Plus, with the threat of poverty, it's like if you don't work hard, you might be poor, so stay scared.
So I'm going to ask a question that I don't even know if you have an answer, but how do you see, I know, right? So cruel. How do you see us getting out of that? I mean, obviously, that's years and decades and all the things in the making.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, how do we get out of that? I know for myself, like, I agreed that yes, I think that all the time. And I'm trying to deal with that underlying subconscious trauma and all the shit that's in there that makes me feel like I am not enough, therefore things are not enough. But I imagine that people who are working on that, it's not everybody.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest challenges I think in especially in current times is holding sincere hope that we can do better in the future. And Angela Davis, and I apologize because I'm going to slightly butcher this because I'm bad at direct quotes, but she basically said you have to believe that a better world is possible and you have to do it every day. And I think that's the thing that I sit in. Like, I have to believe that enough people want this that eventually we will find our way to it, that eventually we will make space for it. And it starts, or it can start with individual work, and then it blooms out from there. Like the work that I do, a lot of the coaching I do is around working with business owners. And the fun thing about business is it amplifies all the poor beliefs you have, all the systems that you've bought into that you don't even realize it, all the societal structures that are in play for you and against you, and all the feelings you have. And so you have to start dealing with those things, or like I've watched grown white men burn down their whole business because somebody said something mean to them. We literally just watched on a public stage as Elon Musk bought Twitter because people were mean to him there and tanked it in 6 months. And that wasn't the only reason he bought Twitter, but it was a big one because white men have feelings and then they do nonsense, but they have the power and capacity to do a lot of messy shit with their nonsense that affects the rest of us. And so when I'm thinking about what does it look like to get out of this, it starts in our communities, in our spaces. we can start small. It's funny. So you think about time travel and people think, oh, I don't want to travel to the past. If I do the wrong thing, then I might change the whole outcome of the future. But we never think that about the current now. What if you do one small thing now that changes the whole outcome of the future? And so if you can take that as what's one small thing I can do in the direction of the world I want to live in, not the world as it exists today. And the better you get at that, the more consistent you get at that, people will see that and then they'll invite you on their podcast like you did. And also, you will see the impacts of your change. You will get better at it. And then those small things will become slightly bigger things. And then you'll have opportunities. Like you don't wake up and become like, the head of your town or whatever on a whim. You build towards it through a long history of showing up in those spaces. And I think the spaces where we can affect the most changes are in our communities, both online and locally. And that's the spaces that we can start in. And it doesn't have to be big and world changing. And I think that's where we run into trouble because we look at the world, we look at the presidency, we look at the state of laws and state legislature and all these pieces, and we go, well, I can't change any of that. And we take it to mean I can't change anything. And those are not the same. And in order to change that, you start with changing the small things.
Brilliant. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's important.
It
I
is.
do want to circle back to a little bit about the business because you had said
Yeah.
something earlier that had me thinking. And again, this might be an uncomfortable ask, so we can certainly not do it or edit
I'm the
it
queen
out.
of awkward. Let's do it.
So you were talking about wages. You touched on wages, minimum wage, I think specifically. But having your husband work for you, I want to look at when you have family working for you, what does that conversation look like? And you even mentioned like the ebbs and flows. So I don't know how many people you have at your company, but I know that if there's an ebb and a flow and something is going south, you probably want to pay your team before you pay yourself, but you and your husband work together, which means your income together is what is taking care of the family. When you have family, and I say family because I have worked for companies where they have their cousins in the company and whatnot, how you kind of set up that pay structure or employment structure.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have no problem answering all of it. I love talking about money, so we can always do that.
Good.
My husband is a unique case because we share all our finances. So it doesn't matter on paper who gets what pay. What matters is the money in our bank account that goes to our bills because we share all our funds. We don't have any separate accounts by intention. That's how we decided we were going to do our finances. I will say, for most of you listening, please have your own separate bank account, like your little slush fund trust thing. I have a whole business, so if my husband and I split, like I still have ways to have revenue on my own, but like please set up your own business. Again, I also think my husband's an exception and that like it would be handled. He's really just a very nice guy. I think even if we were getting a divorce, I can never see him being particularly vindictive about anything. That I think is an exception. And I would say to protect yourselves, if you're listening to this, please have your own side money that you put away somewhere from your own paycheck that is just yours. I highly recommend that. The second thing about paying my husband and myself, we both are on payroll. So the setup of my business is I'm a single member LLC. I take an S election because we make enough money that makes sense from a tax perspective. So we both get a salary. His is lower than mine, again, intentionally, because we get a better tax rate on draws that I take from the company that are not part of the salary. So to maximize our taxes, he's on a lower salary for his role. I'm on a medium salary for what's appropriate level salary for a CEO. And then everything else we take as draws. Because we're in this space where financially we share all our finances, it's better for us to optimize for the reduction in taxes than to have him have a like higher salary band, if that makes sense. especially with the laws of like they can't ask for your past salary. So if he ever needed to get a job somewhere, they don't get to know what his salary was and they can't base his future salary off of that. So he's protected in those ways. And again, we're sort of in it for the long haul. We're coming up on 15 years married and 17 years working together. So I think we're okay because there's no signs that, oh, this is about to go south, if that makes sense. And certainly I can't predict the future. Something could happen. But I feel confident with what we have in place that that will work out fine. I have hired other family in the past, and I probably will do so again in the future, including siblings, including my mom. And every time I have a contract. And what I say to people is contracts are a love language because they say, whatever I say to you when I like you and we're at our best, our honeymoon phase, I'm going to have to hold to, even if I turn into the world's worst raging asshole. So what I would say is always have a contract. If somebody says, oh, but we're family, we don't need a contract, I appreciate the desire to prove trust. And also that's a risk on both sides because not only am I protected, or not only are they protected, like I can't just not pay them because then they could take me to court. They also have to do the thing they said they're going to do, right? So we have a contract. And I think what I tell people when I send contracts, I have my contract set up, I think, to be fairly fair. But I always suggest that people take it to a lawyer or someone with legal expertise, or I guess you can also ask ChatGPT. I don't know how much I trust ChatGPT personally, but you can certainly get some ideas of what different clauses say. Make sure you understand the contract before you sign it, and always, always, always ask if there's a clause you don't understand or a clause you don't want in there or you want changed. I think too many of us are willing to accept a contract as is because we feel like if we ask, they're going to just pull it out from under us. And sometimes that might be the case. I had a lease once where they said, you can't have candles. And I said, oh, in this state, you can't put that in there. It wasn't at a college. It was just an apartment. And I was like, that's not a clause that's enforceable. They're like, we don't care. We're not taking it out. That's just our clause. And I'm like, okay, whatever, weirdos. On the flip side, I have worked with literal lawyers and negotiated contract terms, and they've been fine with it. So it is always worth asking. And if somebody says to you, oh, that clause is in there, but we never act on it, especially if it's a litigation clause or a payment around late fees or whatever, assume that you're probably going to be the exception because inevitably you will be, and either get it changed. If they never act on it, cool, let's just take it out. But if they won't take it out, know that if you sign that with that clause in, you are likely to be the exception. I've had clients try to pull things and I'm like, oh, that's not what the contract says, but thanks for playing. Because I'm thoughtful about contracts. Contracts, when done right, are a way to say, I'm going to honor my commitment to you that I'm making in this moment, no matter what happens in the future. And so I would say for everyone, get a contract and be clear about what you expect from them in terms of work and what they can expect from you in terms of pay. And of course, you can always be flexible. But if it's something where you know already that you're going to be flexible, just write it into the contract so they don't have to wonder if Heather's going to hold her word or not. I'm pretty integrous, so you can probably bet on that, but I'll also put in a contract for you so you don't have to doubt.
Yeah, it's just safety. Safety.
Yeah, safety and trust. Like I
Rail
think
guards.
contracts. Yeah, guardrails, I think. But
Guardrails, that's the word.
You were so close. I think it also shows a level of care. I care enough about you that I'm going to sign a document that says that I'm going to do this. Again, even if I turn into the bit, if we have a falling out, I'm still going to pay you the money. And then there's always a cancellation clause in contracts, right? So I might cancel on you, but I'll still pay you whatever I owe you, of course, right? And I think people believe that, oh, if you cared about me, you wouldn't want a contract. And it's like, no, because I care about you, I want a contract because I want us to both be protected on this. And it creates clearer boundaries. When you work with family, boundaries are the thing that makes it not turn into a shit show.
Did you have a ironclad contract with your first business partner?
Not the one that I was hoping. These are hard-fought lessons, Raven. It was a learn as we go. And, it's so funny. So my first business partner, he was 8 years older than me. So he was in his 30s when I met him. And I was still, again, my like mid 20s. So really, he should have known better, but he didn't know that much about business. There's not a lot of love lost there at this point. I did most of the things because I was operations. Like I did most of the moving forward of paperwork, of contracts with employees. And when we were, right before we closed the business, we were at 9 employees. So we had like real structure. I know that's not a big company, but like it's bigger than me and my husband, which is what I do now because that's convenient for me. And then I bring in contractors for projects. The other thing I will say is you can always negotiate pay. And if people don't want to negotiate pay with you, that's probably a big red flag in most cases. Like if they're not even willing to entertain the conversation or understand why you might want a different pay. And my advice to any woman listening to this is your rates are too low. Please raise them. Like, I don't know what your rates are, but I'm so 1000% sure that that's true. I know a white dude who charges $500,000 to work with him for like a half year. And like people pay him that kind of money. So like whatever you think you're charging, it's too low.
I better, if I pay that much to work with somebody, I better get a cape and be able to
Yeah, like
fly.
you better come to my house and make me dinner 3 nights a week. That's all.
Well, I feel like we have definitely covered the fact that no matter what is happening, you want a contract.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think, like, again, contracts aren't scary and they're not bad or mean. And I think that's the thing we're taught because, again, it allows people who want to exploit us, right? If you don't have a contract and I just have to take your word for it, well, that kind of sucks. Because what if you die? Or what if you leave the company? Or what if you change your mind tomorrow? Or what if you say, oh, I never said that. You misunderstood me, right? Gaslighting is wildly real. So,
Well, I feel like we have covered a ton of stuff. You've been super insightful. I love wrapping up the show with 3 hacks. And since we've covered everything from capitalism to change agents to contracts to having your family work for you, I would take any more hacks you have. Top 3.
top 3 hacks. I was ill prepared for this question. All right. Hack number 1, practice saying hard things to yourself in the mirror until you can do it without second guessing yourself, laughing, judging yourself, negotiating against yourself. This especially includes when you are trying to say a rate that you want to charge. Like if you can think of the biggest number that you could charge, like let's say you wanted to charge someone $500,000. Can you say that to someone with a straight face without immediately going, oh, but it's okay if that's too much, and then it's this or that, or without like bursting out laughing or feeling weird or embarrassed? So hack number 1, practice that until you can do it, because the more you say it, the more your brain gets used to it. And the more we get used to things, the more we believe they're possible, which is a stupid thing about brains, but also you can hack that.
I love it.
The second hack I would say is get to know yourself. And that's not really a hack as so much as a life goal, but touch those really sensitive areas that you avoid or that make you feel really uncomfortable. Or know when you know something about yourself, but you don't want to know, so you don't look at it. Look at those places. The more you know yourself and love even the bad and terrible parts of yourself and the imperfect parts of yourself, because they all make up who you are, the easier it becomes to build a business and a life that you actually want without guilt, without fear, without shame, and without worrying what other people might think of you. Sorry, that's like the least hacky hack because it's lifetime work.
No, but it was brilliant because it does. I think everything we've touched on, that it circles back to that though, right? Like you're not going to be good at serving someone a contract if you haven't addressed that. You're not going to be good at negotiating if you haven't addressed that. You're not going to be good at being a change agent for the world if you haven't addressed that. You're not going to be good at growing your business, sustaining your business if you haven't addressed that. It is a key point, and I feel like we don't look or talk about it enough.
Yeah. That's a lot of the work that I do with folks, which I love. And I appreciate everyone who trusts me with those parts of themselves. And I guess the last hack would be start now with whatever thing you think you want to be different. Like if you want the world to be different, What is one thing, even if it's tiny, that you can do right now to move that? People always say, "Oh, I'll donate to this cause when I have more money or more time, or I'll volunteer here when I do this." But the when I have more never comes because the goalpost always moves. So the best way to be able to do that when you have more is to do it now when you have less time, money, resources, etc. Just start with something small. The more, it's like flossing. I hate flossing. Why do the mouth bones need so much maintenance? I don't know. If you start, you build up the muscle and the habit and the practice, and it's easier for you to make that choice in the future if you make it today.
Brilliant. And for all the people tuning in who have loved this conversation, we've used some curse words, we've covered a whole gamut of topics. If they want to find you, how do they find you?
My website is pixelsforhumans.com, and if you go to /podcast, there's a special download there for you, and you'll also find this episode and others that I've been on. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is LinkedIn/in/HLRJO, which are all my initials. I have a lot of them. So you can find me in those places, and you can email me at heather@pixelsforhumans.com.
And I will put all of that in the show notes. Heather, it has been my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Raven. This was really great.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. For all the juicy deets on this episode, be sure to check out our show notes or give us a holler on Instagram at Hacking the Patriarchy Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, don't be shy. Please share it with your friends. Sharing is caring after all. Lastly, if you'd like to lend your personal support, please take a moment to tell the world about it with a review on your favorite streaming platform. We'd be forever grateful. Tune in again soon to enjoy a brand new episode of the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. And until next time, keep on hacking, my friends.